Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ventures podcast. I'm excited about today's episode with Josh Vitulli. You know, the last sequence of episodes on this show really have been a focus on why Web3 matters for human flourishing around the world. And in this conversation, we get into DAOs, we get into metaverses, we get into NFTs, really from Josh's personal experience in a DAO, working with NFTs, spinning up a new project, thinking about the metaverse and being very active in the metaverse space. And the tone really is about how this is practically going to affect change for the world. Like there's a lot of financial speculation going on with prices going up and down and very sideways in this field. But more stories about why this matters, I think, is important. So I'm delighted to be able to have this conversation. If you're listening, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com. There I'll have more extensive show notes and different links to the things that we talk about today, including a couple corrections. And if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures and it should show up. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Josh Vitulli. All right, Josh, welcome back to the show.
I will. Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited to have you back because the last few episodes I've had with some folks, we've looked at how Web3 can help promote human flourishing. We've looked at DAOs and DeFi and NFTs and a variety of different new technologies that I and others and you are extremely hopeful for creating a better world. And I'd love to just get the audience up to speed. You wrote an amazing article recently on the different aspects of NFTs beyond Bored Apes and art, and I'll link to that in the show notes here. But I'd love to just hand you the mic and just, you know, what's the latest? Like what are the things that are occupying your brain these days around these important topics?
Thank you very much for the introduction, Will. I mean, Bored Apes or Beyond Beeple and Bored Apes was kind of an article birthed out of frustration with just what I was seeing recorded in the mainstream media. And I think, you know, momentum is really important to realizing some of those like more utopian futures in Web3. So when people in the mainstream media are starting to ingest like, oh, they broke Ethereum, oh, it's, you know, $1.2 million, like it's just a higher barrier to entry perceptually from kind of everyone in the marketplace. So I wanted to just take the time to like move away from the hype train and ground in reality some of the ways NFTs could be used, are being used, or are under consideration for use in everything from decentralized communities to Fortune 10 companies. And so in my work, I get to see a little bit behind the scenes and how people are thinking about using NFTs for different applications. I mean, the corporate interest is wildly different than the DeFi interest, is wildly different than, you know, your NGO interest. So I think there's a lot of different expressions that NFTs can take that will serve utility in different ways. And I think, you know, one of the easiest examples of that is what's being called like a soul-bound NFT. So something that, you know, you receive as a credential, as that represents some part of you, your experience, and you can't sell that. That won't be on the open marketplace. So over time, you'll be able to kind of pack your Web3 wallets with these, you know, fragments of identity that kind of symbolize who you are. Yeah. And that's just one way that we could see NFTs used in different contexts, frankly.
Yeah, because it's beyond, I mean, right now, like the last year or so, whether people admit it or not, it's clearly economically driven in terms of being able to buy these NFTs and, you know, line go up, right? Number go up, that YouTube video. And I think there are hints, even within these communities that are clearly trying to get rich, there are actually hints of, oh, wow, we actually are human beings interacting with one another toward a goal. Oh, wow, I kind of see how this technology could potentially be used to make the world a better place. And I think as more and more of Web3 takes over, and we have more, as you say, the different aspects of our identity on chain that will make our on chain and online and potentially offline worlds easier. There's just a tremendous amount of opportunity, right? And so within Banyan, yeah, I'm curious just
I just wanted to touch on the Bored Apes for a moment there, because as skeptical as I am of kind of the hyper wealth that's created, you did see them transition to kind of a proper community. I know there's social elements and they have social clubs and some different metaverses and they have some IRL experiences, but with the release of like ApeCoin and the Apeverse, I think you saw like, the potential for a collective that's highly capitalized to start innovating in new spaces. Now, do I wish that somebody in the DAO had been like, yo, let's preserve a bunch of forest in Africa and protect some like apes? Yeah, I definitely would prefer that they like had that perspective as a community, in like, reforestation of ape habitats in Central Africa.
I heard they did something like that.
No way. Gosh, I can't keep up on everything.
I think there is an ape conservation thing as part of it. We need to look that up and put that in the show notes. But the last I heard from other ape members is that apes are going to be protected for the long haul. So they've done something, and we'll have to come back to our viewers and listeners about what exactly that is. But I will put it in the show notes.
Well, I will eat my words. Good on them. So yeah, I guess then I'm less skeptical. I'm happy that they are taking some of that tremendous wealth and transitioning it toward other people. So yeah, I just wanted to drop in there and note that like you are seeing some of the higher collateralized communities taking advantage of that capital in productive ways. Yeah.
So, okay. So for the members of BanyanDAO who are listening in, and for those who aren't familiar, BanyanDAO is a new DAO. We're probably 5 months old now, that Josh and I are both a part of, which is all about promoting human flourishing by building this community of entrepreneurial leaders. There's lots of internal teams and processes that are happening. We had this April 29th training day, which you spoke at, and I think was just really, really amazing. The feedback from that has been tremendous. We do have those recorded, so if you're listening to this and missed some of those, you can come into BanyanDAO and figure out how to get access there. But from your experience, because you're both a member of BanyanDAO and you're spinning up a new project, your own DAO within it. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know if it's going to become its own DAO yet, but it certainly is a product under development. I think we've got to get with our operations people and figure out what that necessarily looks like. If we're speaking technically, in the DAO, we will be organized as a minion, part of the DAO. But we still need to understand, what like profit sharing and all that stuff's going to look like. And then, of course, we're going to spin up our own coordinate as well. So that, as to the extent we're a separate DAO, that's probably about it for the time being. But the product development team is all members of BanyanDAO at the moment. We're growing by a couple team members each week as we get deeper into this process. Awesome. And the project that we're working on together is called Starling. And the reason it's called Starling is because Starlings murmurate. They, somehow magically know the location of their 7 nearest starling brothers and sisters, and they flock in these beautiful formations. And so when I started thinking about the Web3 problems that interest me and that captivate my attention in real life work, which is like decentralized work and the impact on, culture, experience, and real estate, I started to think about like what that would look like for all the clients that I have that are basically huge employee workforces, and what happens to those companies if they like atomize and decentralize and all these workers are kind of left out in the cold without an agent. And so the thought was that we could use, Web3 protocols, as well as some, the language still gets tricky for me. I don't know if we're technically using oracles, but to bring all of your Web3 data into one place, migrate Web2 data like GitHub onto the Web3 chain, and then translate IRL, like meet space credentials and information. For example, like a volunteer experience. Like I was in the Peace Corps 2 years. There's no way I can get that on chain in current state, but that's an important part of my like identity and past. How can we bring those three sources of like personal data together to develop an online identity that has some built-in features of reliability? And Starling is really about being able to mint your Web3 CV after we go through a few steps of all those protocols. And while we're focused on kind of independent gigging, freelance, networked mesh workers across, you know, the knowledge sector, sometimes we just lose our train of thought.
Yeah.
We'll have to edit that there.
Okay, all good. Yeah. So what has the process been like to seed the idea in BanyanDAO, see people attracted to it, organize? What has that process been like to organize a group of people that might be all around the world, that might have various degrees of experience and interest in what you're doing?
I would say super challenging. I'm actually working on another blog piece about this experience, so stay tuned as I kind of crystallize my thoughts on that, but I do have some existing thinking. You know, I had a DAO fail about the same time we started up BanyanDAO, and it wasn't ever very formal, but I had gotten about 20 people together in a Discord channel, and I was calling it Metaversal DAO, and I had artists and game developers, and I was trying to use spaces in Decentraland to be a showroom for these people's artistic and creative skills. And I made the assumption that if I just rolled the ball out and been like, here's Bland, it's a sandbox, you like sandboxes, go play, that like magically the independent creative spirit would swell up in this network, and people would just be like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And it didn't happen. I mean, I was also not the best Discord manager. It was my first time in the space, but like probably the number one failure is I assumed that more people had the confidence in the Web3 space to be self-organizing. And I emphasize confidence there because what we're discovering as we go through this process is that our meetings are more like classes and education for each other. Just because the vocabulary is new, like everybody's migrating into this space. And so there's not a ton of like existing confidence when talking about ideas you're unfamiliar with, right? And so we need to set up like a really gentle learning environment in our group work so that people can say, I don't know, so that people can generate, like bring forth ideas, even if they're a little worried. You know, I had a similar conniption in this one, in this project as well, because again, building on my failure experience, I was like, well, this time I'm just going to have a really rigorous plan. And so I made like a 15-step sub-nested task set so that anybody asynchronously could come in and just be like, I want to do that, click. By the time we got to the second meeting, it was clear that that wasn't effective. And so we had to be much more co-creative about who was doing what and what support they would need. So that's started to become more effective. And that kind of dovetails with the third. And this only really works at a certain size, probably somewhere between 6 and 8 people, maybe up to 12. But scheduling kind of 30-minute one-on-ones with each team member on like a weekly basis. Because like I was getting asked questions, do we have enough technical people on our team the other day? And I was like, frankly, I don't know. And so that was like the next thing we brought up in all these calls is like, okay, we're not going to talk about the project now. Let's just talk about your background, why you're here, what you're hoping to get out of this. Because, you know, at our state of maturity, we're still basically a volunteer organization. So there's no command and control structure. So finding those other incentives in there is certainly challenging. And that'll be my last point. And I know you're ready to jump in. The fourth thing I did in terms of incentives is I started building an NFT collection for like a Genesis collection for Epoch 1 or Season 1 contributors. And so everyone will get a personalized like one-on-one NFT. And for most of the people on the team, it will be their first NFT. So that's in development now, but it's far enough along that I, broke it out in a meeting and showed them. And I think people were just excited that they might have that in their wallet. And one day, if Starling becomes this super functional thing, they'll have that one of one that said they were there from like day one.
Oh, cool. So you're going to airdrop it to people, or essentially the people in Epoch One are kind of on the whitelist for that new mint. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or on the list. Yeah. We'll see if we can upgrade some of the language around Web3. But okay. So then the last episode you were on was all about metaverses and kind of the work that you were doing in Decentraland and kind of your thoughts about the space. Now that was about 6 months ago or so ago. What has changed in the landscape? What has changed about what? Get us the update on all things metaversal education.
I mean, I think what has changed is the clear proliferation of new actors entering the space in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, Apeverse being the most prominent example. And just the sheer value that was created in that moment. And for me, and someone that's been like in some of the more pioneering metaverses, it's really interesting to see these competitors emerge and really curious about what they're going to eventually do, because most of them are still kind of primarily game-based. I think the pioneering ones that have kind of a loftier hope for what a Web3 metaverse could look like outside of a play to earn environment. The interesting, last time we talked, I mean, cryptos were kind of going crazy. And now that they've come back down to earth, like this is a moment where if you wanted to play, but were priced out for a moment, now is probably an opportunity to like sneak into like Sandbox or Decentraland and pick up like a plot of land or an estate, because the values like have decreased significantly. The actual sales price of land has not decreased that much, but the cost of mana has gone way down, which even though that shouldn't seem to matter, that they should move and like inversely proportional to each other. The like market moves too slow, and some people will just leave their properties like priced at the wrong point. And if a currency crashes like $3 overnight, you scoop it up at 25% its original value, then you can run to the marketplace before the landowners realize and pay for completely devalued currency.
That's an interesting.
It's a buying opportunity if you're in it for the long haul. But I'm not a financial advisor.
Right. Yes.
Don't edit that part out if you edit the other part in.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get like LinkedIn messages. You said go buy Decentraland and Sandbox. Next.
Yeah. So no, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of the gaming community is kind of pushing this first wave of the metaverses, and it is interesting what Yuga Labs is doing with their other side, and kind of what I've heard around all the different characters and minerals and different weapons and ways that it's going to be sort of co-created over the next couple of years. But I like the thread about how can metaverses help us IRL. And I'd be curious, from your background, from a sort of a design and from a like how people can flourish perspective, how are you thinking about that? Or are we destined to be running around in our little haptic suits and metaverses the rest of our lives, or do you see a way that metaverses can help us in real life?
Yeah, I'll answer that with just a little story. I went to the Museum of Future Experience in Williamsburg a few weeks ago, and I was going to a show called Gnosis, which was like an audio spatial immersive virtual environment event. And so I got there, and it's an hour show, and you go into the back room, which just has a bunch of chairs set up and a bunch of like heavy curtains to dampen sound, 4 big speakers in each of the corners, and then you like throw a VR headset on. And so the first 30 minutes was a guided meditation with your eyes closed, but they would use lights in the headset to like stimulate brightness or something. So because your eyes have a sensory reaction regardless of whether they're open or closed. And then the second half was, I'd say it was a little bit like being by yourself in Avatar and being on a chariot that's just kind of like floating through different like sci-fi landscapes. And so their intent was to stimulate some sort of like emotional high based on this like audiovisual experience. I'd say their ambition was outpaced their ability a little bit. It was a pretty low render 3D environment. It was a pretty heavy headset, which after 30 minutes of like meditation, you're kind of like, my neck hurts here, guys.
Yeah, right.
But I clearly grasped the possibility of how you could use like a virtual experience for like wellness that didn't require like a therapist. Ways you could act like prime people and put them in environments to access different emotional states, whether that's like happy or sad, so they can like confront old demons. So I think that's where I probably see the most promise toward flourishing at the moment, to be honest, which surprises me. And that's actually where I'm mostly talking to corporations about how they should use metaverse right now. Because in reality, I mean, and this has been headlines all over, like the hardware and the tech for the metaverse Zuckerberg wants to begin, like we don't even know if it's possible, right? According to some experts. So, I mean, this experience itself is a much more accessible way for like companies to get in. And then their other gateway right now is like lo-fi social networks like Verbella, which is essentially like a gamified, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like gaming meets social media meets work. So those are kind of how corporations are investigating metaverse stuff right now.
So then that's super interesting. I like, yeah, because the flourishing with regard to physical and mental health, it would be a little ironic because people would think that more technology, more integrated outside of IRL would be problematic. But I think you're right. If with the right technology and the right science behind how those types of experiences can help, and just with practical work stuff, right? I mean, it was, what was it? One of the big, like Walmart was using VR to help train and their workers and their stores and things. Like there's all kinds of applications where that can be sort of bridged with metaverse and an open metaverse that probably could lead to a whole bunch of interesting upskilling and co-working, future of work type stuff. That then could help in when you take the headsets off could help in real life. So, all right. So then on the topic of Web3 things helping humans flourish and helping IRL, coming back to your other project, to Starling, how do you see this project helping people in real life in the future?
So, you know, it's always easiest to start with yourself. So I'll start there. But so I've been on chain for a year and change. So I'm a relative like newbie, even though, you know, there's not that many of us here yet. And like the totality of my Web3 reputation is in 2 different wallets. It's basically 3 total NFTs, one of which was a rug pull. And I was thinking, like, if I want to work, like, what would I have to do to build my reputation to work in this space? Like, how do you enter Web3 with history? Because if it's like, you know, I'm getting too old to say my dad because he's long retired from the workforce, but like, if my friends in Chicago or not, who are way outside the tech industry, like wanted to, like real estate developers, okay, if they wanted to get into Web3, how would they bring their history with them instead of showing up as like a newborn babe? And so that was kind of the genesis moment for me. And the second kind of like white whale I'm chasing is how we can start looking at networks to build reputations for individuals and teams without individuals and teams and customers rating each other. Because some of the readings I've done lately, and a lot of it is around like gig economy service workers, but like those ratings have, like the raters have tremendous power. It's asymmetric and can cause some both like professional and psychological damage within the network. So my thought is, like, if we can partner with communities that have no on-chain experience, but are really interested in bringing their community on-chain, could we mint the requisite NFTs, the POAPs, like basically backfill their history, but then also understand how trust works in that network so that we can kind of rate the network trust reliability, and being in multiple different networks would enable you to say, I'm in this reliable network, I'm in this reliable network, I'm in this reliable network, therefore I am reliable. Because if it's a reliable network and you're unreliable, they would kick you out of the network. So that's kind of my theory, is that we can look at kind of a network of networks to rate people almost like not rate people at all, but to just confirm ability without, that ranking system.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and then we can start talking about the real dreams, which is building a talent graph, which you could essentially say, or identify like this team, if we put these 6 people together, they're absolutely going to murder this. Like they will be the best entrepreneurs ever. And then we'll just chuck them into a DeFi ecosystem, fund that up, and just start. I mean, imagine the pace you could run at with how fast those things are going right now.
Wow. That's cool to think. Like, okay, new notification. You've been paired up with these 6 other people based on some algorithmic determination that the 7 of you are going to be able to build the best X.
Waste management system in Tulsa.
Waste management. I love that example. Okay. You're going to be able to build the best waste management system in Tulsa. And if you accept, here's the wallet address with your money, so you know it's real, right? It's like a
smart contract binding, and then you're off.
Wow. Yeah. Now we're starting to get somewhere. And let's talk a little bit more about that. Okay. So a talent graph where there has to be some trust, right? There has to be some trust and sort of oracles that verify that the things that the machines are picking up on chain, or that we can see by looking at their wallets, are actually authentic and real. How are you thinking about that authenticity and trust network, just even in the way that you're approaching this project?
Yeah. So imagine if we had, like, one of the networks I participate in, although the name will seem paradoxical, is the Women in Innovation Network. And as far as I know, it's North American. I'm not a recurring guest, but I get invited to speak once in a while. And I think it would be incredible to work with them as like a partner community to figure out how they validate trust in their decentralized network. And then translating that into a Web3 representation or expression. So I don't have like the specific answer right now. Other networks are trying things just like peer review, essentially. So if like 3 of your peers like scan your QR code, it's authenticated. I don't know if I find that reliable enough, especially with the anonymity afforded in Web3, if you so choose to accept it. There's most of the reputation things in Web3 right now are predominantly like bounties, which are like targeted developer audience, right? And then there are POAPs, which is kind of just like proof of activity. And then there's NFTs, which can be like price exclusive for some people. So from those, I don't know if we can find like a pure trusted identity alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I lost myself there.
Yeah, no, I mean it will be interesting to see all these micro experiments about how trust and trustlessness, right? How trust and blockchains, how trust in humans and trust in math can really affect change in a positive way, IRL. I'd love to just maybe wrap up with the number of sections that you had in your recent article about approaching NFTs from really a lens about like, hey, everybody, this is why this matters. Could you kind of like even just or summarize or sort of pull out the bullet points off that you remember off the top of your head around what those were and why those are the things that came to mind as you were writing them?
Yeah. So I think, the one I'm most excited about is the NFT as like a commemorative brick. So, when communities raise funds up to like build a new pool or something, or a new youth center, traditionally you just kind of like get some funding from the city, maybe get some private donations, and then like for whatever's left, you're running around the community trying to sell bricks that you can etch your name into, so people will forever know that you were a bricklayer. But NFTs can work the same way. And the example I use in the article is kind of silly, but I just mentioned the NFT, theoretically, you could hang in your house in the metaverse to let your neighbors know you support habitat preservation for Kagu, the ghost bird of New Caledonia. So I'm excited about that way. As a researcher, I'm really excited at the idea of like NFTs is almost like patents. You can actually do this on Mirror right now, and Lazy Mint, Knowledge Works. So you can get paid for that. There's a few other platforms. I believe Satchel Works might be working on something similar.
Appreciate the plug.
And then there's the membership NFTs. I think probably where I get a little bit more speculative is in like thinking about NFTs as like loyalty programs, as kind of like your key into a ecosystem of like products or brands. I think you could use that NFT to get discounts, but also retain like the ownership of your data so that the brands don't acquire it. And I think that offers some interesting opportunity for exchange. If you have this wallet full of interesting data, can you license it back to the brands so that they can improve your product experience, et cetera? And then the last two I touched on NFTs as blueprints. I definitely see a future where you'd be able to design in the metaverse and then pair that with additive manufacturing to build things as big as like an actual house. And then lastly, and I said this in the article, I said this one gets a bit sinister, but NFTs as identities is kind of interesting. And that's one thing we're trying to do with Starling, is like mint an authentic, verifiable identity. But there's like the flip side of that coin too, where you could, as an actor, assemble multiple identities in the metaverse space or in the blockchain space, and then resell those identities. Or you could have multiple identities to commit crime in the metaverse. I don't know if we know how that's possible yet, but I'm sure someone will figure it out. Criminals are always ahead of us. So those are just kind of some of the speculations I included in there that are a bit more potentially practical and reach more people than kind of the high budget tickets that attract eyeballs and attention.
Good, that's good. All right. Well, any final words just on the overall theme about what you're experiencing? I mean, we talked about the NFTs, we talked about metaverse, we talked about DAOs, kind of your experiences in them, the way that things are being leveled up to kind of advance everything. But just overall, like, what are your hopes and aspirations for this technology to make the world a better place? Is there any final words or ways you're thinking about that to kind of leave this audience of investors and venture builders and entrepreneurs with before we close here?
Well, I'll just tie it back to Project Starling, because I think that has some human flourishing built in it. At BanyanDAO, we talk about the network of entrepreneurial leaders, right? And so I think the hope of Starling is that it brings some really cool communities into Web3, that it opens networks to people that have been excluded from them in the past, either by class or by geography, and that it, is kind of a cooperative marketplace more than a competitive platform, where people can, write their own dream projects, and if we can figure out how to fund it and put a team around it, we can go, down and do some waste management work in Tulsa.
Yeah. There you go. That's good. All right. So if people, obviously we'll put the link to your article, but if people want to follow up with you and chat more online, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can find me at on LinkedIn, pretty easy. I'm just Josh Vitulli on there. And then if you've dropped into the BanyanDAO Discord, I am vitulli.eth. And if you're wandering around anywhere else, you might see me as Possum Dynamite and might not know it.
Love it. All right, Josh, really appreciate your time. This has been great.
Always will. Thanks so much for having me on, and talk to you soon.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.